My name is William Linville. More than 250 years have passed since I walked the mountains of North Carolina. I never founded a town there, and I never built a home beside the great waterfall that now bears my name. Yet today, my name remains across the Blue Ridge, in the Linville River, Linville Falls, Linville Gorge, Linville Mountain, and the town of Linville. This is the story of how that happened. I was born around the year 1708, when the American colonies were still young and the western wilderness seemed to stretch forever. My family belonged to a close group of Linvilles, Bryans, Morgans, and Boones. Our families lived near one another, travelled together, and often married into one another's households. My wife was Eleanor Bryan, sometimes called Ellender. She was the daughter of Morgan Bryan, one of the early settlers who travelled south from Pennsylvania into Virginia. Through these family connections, I became closely related to the Boone family. Daniel Boone's wife, Rebecca Bryan, was part of the same extended family. Daniel Boone was not simply a famous frontiersman whose name later appeared beside mine in history. He was family, a fellow hunter, and a companion of the frontier. In the 1720s, members of our families began moving from Pennsylvania into Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. Then, around 1748, we moved again, this time toward the Yadkin Valley of North Carolina. The journey was long and difficult. According to an early Moravian account, Morgan Bryan and I were among the first men to take wagons from the Shenandoah Valley to the Yadkin. The journey took approximately 3 months. We crossed rivers, travelled through dense forests, and fought off wolves. At one mountain, we reportedly had to remove the wheels from our wagons and carry the wagons upward piece by piece. Eventually, we reached the Yadkin Valley. I obtained a large tract of land that included what is now Tanglewood Park, near present-day Winston-Salem. My brother Thomas settled near what later became Kernersville. Other members of the Bryan, Morgan, Carter, Boone, and Linville families soon joined us. But men like us were rarely satisfied to remain within the settled country. We became what later generations called long hunters. A long hunter might leave his family for months at a time. We traveled deep into the wilderness to hunt deer, bear, elk, and other animals. We followed rivers, crossed mountains, and explored lands that were largely unknown to colonial settlers. We slept beneath the trees and carried only what we needed to survive. These expeditions were dangerous. A hunter could be killed by a wild animal, injured in a fall, swept away while crossing a river, or lost in a winter storm. There was also another danger. The wilderness we entered was not empty. Native peoples had lived, hunted, and traveled through those mountains for generations. As colonial settlers moved farther west, conflict increased. Land that appeared open to settlers was already part of the hunting grounds and ancestral territory of native nations. Daniel Boone explored the Blue Ridge and the lands beyond the Yadkin during the late 1750s and early 1760s. I traveled through some of those same areas with him and with other members of our family. Historical accounts later remembered me as the Linville who hunted with Boone and gave his name to the beautiful falls. By the summer of 1766, I was about 58 years old. I was no longer a young man, but the mountains still called to me. My son, John Linville, accompanied me on another hunting expedition into the Blue Ridge. With us was a young man named John Williams, who was reportedly about 16 years old, and another local guide. We made camp near a mountain river known to native people as the Osceola. The river passed through steep mountains and descended over great falls into a deep and rugged gorge. During the night, something troubled me. According to a story preserved in later accounts, I awoke before dawn after experiencing a terrible dream. I was weak or ill, and I warned my companions to leave me and save themselves. I told them that I was too feeble to travel, but the warning came too late. Suddenly, shots rang out through the early morning darkness.
a native war party had discovered our camp. The first volley struck before we could mount an effective defence. My son John and I were both hit. One account says that before we could fire a second shot, we had both been killed. Young John Williams was shot through the thigh, but somehow he escaped. Wounded and alone in the mountains, he endured terrible suffering before finally reaching the settlements. The other guide also reportedly escaped. The exact identity of the attackers remains uncertain.
Some family stories identify them as Cherokee. Other historical accounts describe them as northern native warriors, possibly Shawnee, traveling through a disputed hunting region. What is known is that my son and I were killed during a time of growing conflict. Settlers were moving farther into native hunting territory, and attacks and reprisals were becoming increasingly common throughout the frontier. News of our deaths travelled far beyond North Carolina. On October 9, 1766, the Pennsylvania Gazette reported that William Linville, his son, and another young man had crossed the mountains near the headwaters of the Yadkin River to hunt. The newspaper reported that we were surprised by native attackers and that the father and son were killed. When the news reached our family in the Yadkin Valley, a search party entered the mountains to recover our bodies. Because the Boone, Bryan, Morgan, and Linville families were so closely connected, the loss was felt throughout the settlement. Family tradition holds that Daniel Boone helped lead the search for his uncle and cousin. Accounts differ about exactly what the search party found. Most traditions say that our bodies were located and buried near the river, rather than being carried back across the mountains to the family cemetery. Local stories place our burial near what is now Highway 183, close to where the Blue Ridge Parkway crosses the area. No confirmed grave markers remain today. My death did not end the movement west. Daniel Boone continued exploring. Within only a few years, he would help open the Wilderness Road into Kentucky and become one of the best-known frontiersmen in American history. My widow, Ellender, later traveled west with Daniel Boone, Rebecca Boone, and other members of our family. She eventually died at Bryan Station, Kentucky, in 1797. But something else happened after my death. The river beside which John and I were killed slowly began to lose its original name. The Issaala became known as the Linville River. The Great Waterfall became Linville Falls. The deep canyon below it became Linville Gorge. In time, the name spread across the surrounding landscape: Linville Mountain, Linville Ridge, Linville Caverns, the town of Linville, the village of Linville Falls. My son and I never knew that these places would carry our family name. We never knew that our deaths would be reported in a newspaper hundreds of miles away. We were simply two hunters who entered the mountains together and never returned home. Our graves have been lost. The exact location of our camp remains uncertain, and the full story of that final morning may never be known. But our names were not forgotten. They remain written across the mountains and carried through the waters of western North Carolina. Whenever the Linville River passes through the gorge and falls over the ancient rocks, it continues to tell the story of William and John Linville, the father and son who died together in the Blue Ridge Mountains in 1766.